Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing Monday edition. I'm Brian Calley, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications at the Small Business Association of Michigan. Welcome to the Monday show. I want to thank our sponsor, Marana Group. Marana Group is a data, document, and distribution company located in Kalamazoo. So thank you again for your support. So Brian, I think we have a full agenda today. Welcome back from vacation. Let's start by talking about Michigan's Democratic and Republican endorsement conventions. The Democrats held theirs over the weekend, and Republicans are holding county conventions later this month. So how does this process work, and what might we learn from the outcomes?
Yeah, it's kind of a mystery to a lot of people how certain candidates make it to the ballot. You might think that you voted for Attorney General or Secretary of State in a primary before, but you never have, unless you're a precinct delegate to the county or to the your political party, and so that's the process that is ensuing right now. The Democrats had their state convention over the weekend. And so this is the state convention where the delegates said their process works a little bit different than the Republicans, but you have elected precinct delegates and certain organizations like the UAW and MEA that have delegations that they send. That group of people are the ones who select their candidates for Attorney General, Secretary of State, actually Lieutenant Governor. People don't realize that goes through these conventions as well. It's not just picked by the governor, but has to be approved by the party's convention. And then also Supreme Court nominees. So Justice Richard Bernstein, and then the Democrats are going to send Kyra Bolden, State Representative Kyra Bolden, to take on Brian Zara, an incumbent that is nominated by the Republicans. So that all happened over the weekend. Technically, in Michigan, the nominations to be on the ballot happen in August, but the parties do an early endorsement convention so that the races can start earlier. And so, because everybody wants political race to start earlier, right? So, but the candidates themselves, they narrow it down. The parties pick their nominees for those offices. Your state representatives, your state senators, the governor, that's all on the primary ballot in August. But Attorney General, Lieutenant Governor, Secretary of State, Supreme Court justices, they are never on a primary ballot. They're only picked by these conventions. So the Democrats have picked their candidates. Not surprisingly, they have incumbents. So they selected their incumbents: Dana Nessel for Attorney General, Garland Gilchrist for Lieutenant Governor, Jocelyn Benson for Secretary of State. And as I had mentioned, the two Supreme Court justice candidates, one's an incumbent, one is a challenger, Kyra Bolden and Richard Bernstein. And then they also picked the Board of Education candidates. So there's a state Board of Education, and then the regents to the three public universities, the three big public universities, Wayne State, Michigan State, and the University of Michigan. So all of that, the Democrats chose their candidates that'll be on the November election ballot. They chose over the weekend. Republicans' process goes a little bit, it takes a little bit longer. So they first hold county conventions, where these little known offices called precinct delegates. So it's an elected position. The very bottom, sometimes the very, very bottom, the last thing on your ballot or close to the last thing on your ballot, locally, you vote for precinct delegate for your political party. If you, in the primary, you either get the Republican ballot or the Democratic ballot. And so you pick your precinct delegate. Those elected people are gathering tonight at county conventions, and they will select who from each county goes to the state convention later on this month and selects all those same candidates for the Republicans. So a lot of the ballot for November will be decided here in April. And so you'll see the Attorney General and Secretary of State and the Supreme Court offices, which are the higher profile offices, those by the end of April, the Republicans and the Democrats will have selected their candidates. The Republican side is a little more open because they're not incumbents, right? These are all challengers. You got multiple people that are vying to be the Attorney General candidate. There seems to be a consolidation around just one candidate for Secretary of State. And then I had mentioned Brian Zara is the incumbent Supreme Court justice candidate who is likely to be renominated by the Republicans for re-election. And then at this point, it's not really clear if there'll be a challenge for the second position, essentially to take on Richard Bernstein. But there's an attorney in West Michigan or Southwest Michigan. His name is Paul Hudson, who looks like he's poised to win that nomination. So, from the Republican nomination. So Brian Zara and Paul Hudson to take on Kyra Bolden and Richard Bernstein in the Supreme Court. So by the end of this month, we'll know how that part of the ballot shapes up. Not till August will we have the regular primary for members of Congress, for the state Senate, for the state House, and the governor.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about supply shortages. We've certainly covered various issues here on the briefing before, and the latest victim or project that's being held up due to shortages is the state of Michigan's Heritage Hall, which is a state capitol addition, due to a shortage in aluminum.
Yeah, I thought this was kind of just an interesting angle to a much, much larger story or issue. And that, there's certain commodities, and between Russia and Ukraine, there are a lot of commodities that come from those countries. And so oil has gotten a lot of attention. Aluminum is one of those things as well. And even though it's very unlikely that the state was ever going to buy aluminum from Russia, because it's a commodity, what's happening out there in the marketplace is that as Russia's kind of shut out of that market, that others that used to buy from there are having to buy from new sources. So it's kind of disrupting the supply chain really in a lot of ways that aren't as easy to determine as saying, hey, who do I buy from now? As long as I'm not buying from an entity in one of those countries, I should be fine. Not true. So this Heritage Hall, which is a really cool project at the state capitol. It's kind of a visitor center, but below grade, underground. And it's, all those classes go through and tours and stuff. It's to give a staging area. There'll be a visitor center, a little cafeteria. If you've ever been to the US Capitol, there's a big section where you enter the Capitol that's underground. That's not part of the historic part of the building. Same concept here. It was supposed to open next month, but it's been pushed off now into the summer because of supply chain shortages with aluminum. And so this sort of thing, there's really no indication that we're going to have a lot of relief from that. What we're hearing from our members is that even when you solve for one of your supply chain issues, that another one pops up. And so it's like a whack-a-mole to try, okay, figure it out, new supplier, new source, new process, whatever for this part of my business, and then something pops up somewhere else. And it's not always just in the production of a thing. Sometimes it's transportation. Sometimes it's the labeling or packaging. Packaging has actually been a really big source of trouble in the supply chain, where they can make the component, the thing, the product itself, but the packaging to ship and sell it is what's missing. Or of course, shipping channels in general. So a lot of supply chain issues that are out there, and unfortunately, in the immediate future, it doesn't look like any relief in sight.
Certainly is a global economy. Part of SBAM's agenda is working to improve infrastructure. And a recent audit on estimates and costs within MDOT indicate that supply chain and workforce shortages are having a big impact. What did we learn?
Yeah, this is one of the things that's long been on SBAM's agenda for improvement in the overall infrastructure. And while there's a lot more money now than there used to be into traditional infrastructure, roads and bridges, about $2 billion more per year. There was a plan that was passed in 2015 that it was implemented in stages, and by 2019 it was fully implemented. So the budget went from about 3.3 billion a year or so on roads and bridges up to about 5.3 or 5.4 billion today. But there was a recent audit, not very flattering. Now they take a sample of the cases and of the estimates that are done and how the project costs come in. The audit found 14 projects in which MDOT accepted the vendor's initial proposal as terms of the contract with no negotiation, with the final work averaging 35% higher in hours and 9% higher in costs. So the way it works is that estimate have their own estimators. So they determine what the cost ought to be, and then they put it out for bid. And so what's happening is that they're estimating costs much lower, and then the bids are coming in a lot higher, and there's no negotiation, it's accepting the bids as they come in. Now, if you look at what's happening out there in the landscape today, you can kind of see what's happening. There's other issues in the audit too, but it's the idea that there's a lot more money going into infrastructure, and you put the federal dollars on top of that. I do have some concerns that without more capacity of people, project, and materials to build roads, more money means that there'll just be more demand on the same people and just higher cost per project, as opposed to the additional money going to more projects. Now there will be more projects. I mean, I think the system is getting maximized, but there was anyway, after that audit, there was some news out over the weekend and today in terms of MDOT resetting expectations for the 5-year plan. What they're saying is that the price tag for fixing Michigan roads and bridges is accelerating amid rising material and labor costs, and it's reducing the impact of the influx of cash that the state has seen, which is kind of disheartening. I mean, back when this plan to put the extra money in was going through the Senate, I actually there was a tie-breaking vote when I was president of the Senate, Lieutenant Governor's president of the Senate, tie-breaking vote to increase money into roads. Pretty controversial at the time, and but anyway, roads are in desperate need of repair. But according to MDOT, that starting around 2019, that's well, actually, let me just read you a quote here. Project bids have been coming in about 10% higher over engineering estimates since July, Michigan Department of Transportation officials said, and bridge replacement costs on average have increased 35% since 2018, much of that increase occurring from 2019 forward. And so they're having to make changes to the 5-year plan, projects that they had in the 5-year plan that are having to get pushed out further because the cost of each of those projects is going up. So that to any of our viewers is not going to be a big surprise, because the cost of everything is rising right now. There's so many shortages in people, but it's just one of these areas where the intricacies behind fixing roads and infrastructure is very, very multifaceted, and it does have me somewhat worried here that there's a bipartisan infrastructure bill that passed in Congress and was going to result in some additional money here into Michigan, but based on what we see already with increased spending in roads and shortages in a lot of different areas, it'll make an impact, but the level of impact is not going to be what it would have looked like a few years ago.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about a win for small business. There's an issue that we've covered on the briefing that SBIM advocated for, and that was funding the Unemployment Compensation Fund. And today, Governor Whitmer signed that legislation.
Yeah, now this is, there's multiple rounds of this. Remember, our Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund, which is employer funded, was one of the highest funded in the entire country before the pandemic. And while it never went negative, it basically got close to zero in it through the pandemic. So now it's a matter of building that fund back up. We have been very, very adamant that small businesses must not be held liable and asked to pay for fraudulent claims paid out of the trust fund. And every time an appropriation bill comes up, we go to the table and say, we still need more for the unemployment trust fund so that employers are not billed to make up the difference. And this is the most recent round of that. And so it's It's getting built back up. But what was also put with this particular round were more controls to prevent fraud in the future. We talked previously about the audit that the Auditor General did, the state of Michigan's Auditor General did on the trust fund and the expenditures out of it, and the controls or lack thereof, and kind of jaw-dropping stuff. And so this legislation the legislature passed, and really thanks to them for being so attentive to this issue in both making deposits into the fund and also taking steps to make sure that what just happened doesn't happen again. So the governor signed that legislation, which we very, very much appreciate. We do not, this will not be the end of that story though. It's billions that are still needed in that fund, and maybe the kind of the natural installments into the fund through payroll will do a lot to help if our economy stays strong. But there's definitely still, that fund is still nowhere near the shape that it was pre-pandemic. So this is a victory today in the governor's signature, and something that we will intend to continue to work until that fund looks as strong as it did before, without charging employers more to build it back up.
All right, so the next headline that we're going to talk about is one you predicted, and that is Federal Appeals Court upheld Biden's vaccine mandate for federal workers.
Yeah, remember there are 3 different categories of this, and I had to do a double take on an article that I saw last week that said that a federal appeals court overturned decision on mandate. I was like, oh no, the employer mandate, it wasn't, how did this get to this stage without me noticing? Well, they're talking about the federal employee mandate. So not the one that is that affects the overall businesses. In this case, it was definitely businesses over 100 that were covered by the original vaccine mandate that the Supreme Court struck down or sent back to the appeals court to strike down. That one is still on ice. But you might recall I said at the time that probably the state did have the authority, or the federal government did have the authority to require vaccines of its own employees. So not of small business owners' employees, but their own employees as a condition of employment. As the employer, they can set terms like that, and they did. There was a local, like a district court that had said the federal government couldn't do that. An appeals court overturned it. So the healthcare mandate and the federal employee mandate are 2 areas where the federal government really does have more authority statutorily and legally, just in the terms and conditions of how they operate and do business for these sorts of things. But thankfully, it doesn't affect small businesses who would have previously been impacted by the OSHA mandate that was struck down.
All right, so we took a vacation from Data Monday last week since you were out. So people got to know, Brian, how are we looking around the country and Michigan in terms of COVID and BA2?
Yeah, so things are changing a little bit. And I think 2 weeks ago, the last time that we covered data, I had, I had remarked that over the previous 6 weeks that we saw things, people that were generally epidemiologists, cautious, but not really that concerned about BA2, the variant for an Omicron variant, like Omicron 2, basically. But that had changed, and there was growing concern, especially what was happening in Europe with numbers rising there, and then also in Southeast Michigan or Southeast Asia. There are a lot of places that didn't surprise me a bit, because those areas that have been very substantially on lockdown, a lot less population immunity that Western countries have been building up for some time. But things are definitely changing around the country. Let's just take a look here around around the different regions. So Alaska is still the highest, although you see this dotted line that it's come down quite a bit. But everybody went up and everybody went down at about the same time, which again, that was different for this particular variant. Usually there's weeks difference, and these were pretty uniform in going up and coming down. But if you look at this red line, that's the Northeast, and that's where things usually start to spread in this country. You see it happen there first. That red line, you see it starting to go up, and so I thought it would make sense to take a look just at the last, stretch that part out. Look, it's just the last 90 days. It looks much more modest, but still definitely an upward trend. Now, even though that looks modest, it's it's about twice as high as it was back here a few weeks ago. So it's definitely rising, and I'd say there's kind of growing concern or an expectation, I would say, that it's going up, and that it'll go up. Something that maybe looks like what just happened in Europe. So if you look at the country, the heat map, you'll see Northeast is definitely the area where you see the colors stick out a bit more, and in terms of a uniform type of a way. The exceptions, of course, being Colorado and Alaska. So as things start to rise in the Northeast, again, usually that's a precursor to what we see happening around the country. Now, if you look at or that we will see in the future happen around the country, looking at ICUs and hospitalization nationwide, again, this is for the entire country, you see those are down and remaining low. And it would be a couple weeks from now before you would see this start to go up with if the numbers as a whole go up. Looking at New York, so these are the New York numbers. You see, that it's a little more pronounced in terms of it going up compared to the Northeast. So New York as an individual state going, a sharper line up than the Northeast as a region, and then looking more closely at just the last 90 days, you'll see that that while it is still very low, a clear and undeniable upward trend, and I think some kind of growing expectation that half the population got Omicron. That means half didn't. So there's still room for something as contagious as that. Thankfully, doesn't look to be any more serious in terms of health consequences than Omicron, which proved to be generally less than before. Looking at in New York, their upward trend has been going on here for a little while. So you see that it is starting to show up in hospitals, stretching out that 90 days. Again, this is just New York. You see it as it's going up about 2 weeks late compared to the case numbers. So kind of behaving as we would expect. Here's Michigan, though. Michigan still, remember on that heat map that we just showed, Michigan did not have any. It's very light shades across the board. So this is not a surprise to me that Michigan's case numbers looked very low still, and pretty steady. There's no reason to, there's at this point there's no indications, there's no upward trends that you really see happening. ICUs and overall hospitalization. Remember the hospitalization numbers, these days, because it's hospitalized with COVID, not because of COVID, they're not as reliable as before, but again, relatively speaking, pretty, came down sharp and pretty low. I wanted to just to show the United Kingdom, and this is the last 90 days in the United Kingdom. And this is basically, and this was the BA2 wave. So it happened pretty quickly, and it looked nowhere near as tall as the their overall previous. I want to just kind of show these are deaths per day in the UK, and I mean, you can see how high those got, over 1,000 a day previously back. This is back over a year ago now. They've had good success, especially people over 50 getting vaccinated. So you'll see here this original Omicron wave, it did go up, but again, looked very, very different than previous waves. And then here's like Omicron 2, which remember, this is the furthest lagging of all the indicators. Their infections went up for Omicron 2 or the BA2 variant, then they went back down. Looks like this, this spike here will be even smaller than the original, the Omicron. This BA2 is losing steam now and will probably level out and come back down. So looking at the UK, it gives me some indication that it will be more mild here. I mean, the CDC estimates as many as half of people got Omicron. So there's a lot of population immunity. That's in addition to other types of Omicron or other types of COVID infections and vaccines on top of that. So I think generally speaking, we're probably looking at somewhat of a wave here, but not as complicated as before.
All right, well, thank you for the data update. That's it for today. I hope everyone has a wonderful week, and we'll see you back here on Thursday.
See you on Thursday, everybody.